and I have two guests this evening. On the second half of the show, Ruby Cusack will be on, and she'll be telling us about some of the books that she has written, and they're very interesting. But my first guest is that Western gentleman, Fred Miller. Fred is very versed on anything in West St. John, and tonight he has a lot of slides with us. Now, Fred was on before, and we've had a lot of calls. So this is why Fred is back. So if there's anything you want to see on any of these shows on cable, give us a call or write us a letter, and we'll see that these people are back on again. Fred, what are we going to start with tonight?
Well, Bobby, I thought we'd go back to the Union Street area because on the last show we just briefly got into it, and Union Street plays such a vital role in the history of Carleton that there's so much there to talk about and see. I'm sure the older generation of Carleton would like to see some more pictures on it and for me to talk a little more about it.
And, now, in case somebody hasn't seen the last picture, and I'm sure many of the teenagers today, or a lot of the people in 30s and 40s, don't remember where Union Street is. Could you explain it for them, just where Union Street is?
Well, Union Street runs parallel with Marketplace. If you continue down King Street, passing Market, going down to where the gate is today, to the harbor.
Into the harbor? Yeah.
If you take a right immediately inside the gate, the street there is Union Street. It still exists today, but today it's surrounded by harbor facilities, port on one side and the railroad tracks on the other.
Good. All right. Now, what do we have first?
Well, our first slide, Bobby, is this shows Union Street, the lower end of King Street, Middle Street, Cross Street, Alfred Street, Nelson Street. And this also shows the old wooden docks that were replaced in the from 1928 up until into the 30s, were replaced by the concrete piers, and then later date today we have the new Brun terminals and Fort Term and what have you. But these were the wooden docks that existed in the 20s and the early part of the 1900s. Also, the area in the lower part of your picture there, where Middle Street is, was the area referred to by the citizens as the Old Fort.
The Old Fort?
Right.
What fort was this?
Well, this was so called because the area was where the old Fort Frederick was. It's commemorated on a stone out in Tilly Square. A little bit of the history about Fort Frederick. It was originally Fort Shaughnessy.
Would that have been at the foot of Prince Street? You know, before the bridge, right at the foot of Prince Street?
It would have been about the closest area I can give to you, Bobby, if you remember the old marine dock.
Yes.
Which just ran off the foot of King out towards Middle.
Okay.
That was Carleton Point, or the old fort area.
Good.
And that's where the old Fort Shaughnessy, later named Fort Frederick when it was captured by the British, stood.
That wouldn't have been too far from the Navy Island.
That would have been the point facing Navy Island. There was the Buttermilk Channel divided the Carleton Point from Navy Island. The water area there was called Buttermilk Channel.
I didn't know that. Thanks.
Well, at low tide, in fact, you could walk across for a short interval from Carleton Point to Navy Island, across the Buttermilk Channel, for about 15 minutes.
It was that low?
It went that low, yeah. It was. There was a lot of sandbars and low water areas. And
the bridge is actually sitting on, one of the legs of the bridge is actually sitting on Navy Island now.
Yeah, the last one on land, on the western end, is sitting on Navy Island.
Good, I didn't know which one. Thank you. What do we got next?
The next slide is showing Union Street, and this shot was taken from the grain elevator when they started the construction of the grain elevator in 1928-29, and it's looking towards the mill pond. The area at the top of the picture is the mill pond at low tide, and you can see what a large area the mill pond occupied. But in the front of our picture we have the Fowler's flour mill, which later became the White and Taylor Barrel Factory.
Wait a minute. Wasn't the barrel factory up in Riverview Drive?
Yeah, there was a barrel factory on Riverview Drive.
There was another one.
Yes, in later years, and it was Goldvan, and Mr. Goldvan ran that.
Oh, I see.
And that was up the end of Riverview Drive. I remember that when I was growing up. There it was still operating.
So there was 2 barrel factories over there at the time.
Right, right.
The mill pond. The mill pond, that is where, just in back of the community center now, roughly where the baseball field is now?
Yes, all that area. The
That was
area.
the mill pond.
Yep, from Rodney Street down, completely encompassing the ball field, right up to Ludlow Street, where the Legion now exists, and that was all water up until the fill-in, which took place between 1928 and 1933 by the Harbors Board.
They reclaimed a lot of land there then.
Yes, they did. They reclaimed a lot, and actually, Bobby, it was an exchange of lands. The Harbors Board wanted lands from the city for their port development, and so the city made an agreement with the Harbors Board to fill in a section of land to replace that which they were taking, and that was the Mill Pond area. And the Harbors Board promised to replace Union Street with a street, construct a street wherever they wanted it, and that is where they extended Marketplace on down from Rodney right on down to St. John Street today.
That was a good exchange.
Well, it was a good exchange, yeah, for both parties, yeah.
And we have here now?
The picture we have now is a view of Union Street, and it's taken from about where Charlotte Street would be today if you were standing on the corner of Charlotte Street looking up Charlotte. This looks down Union towards King Street, and the big building on the left is Waldorf Cafe, and on your right hand the buildings there are those buildings went down to where the ferry terminal was on Rodney Wharf.
That was number 4 wharf, was it? Or
Number 5.
Number 5.
Number 5 wharf. Now again, this next slide is a picture of Union Street. This is from Winslow Street corner, looking towards King Street again. The store in the corner was Benjamin Ross's Grocery, and that gentleman standing in the doorway is Benjamin Ross. Next to that was the pool hall. Sammy Wall's Chinese Laundry was next door, and then the Lane's Pool Hall. And of course, as we talked about before, was the post office.
Post office.
It was next door to that, and then Emerson's Hardware went on down to the Union Foundry.
You said Emerson. Which Emerson would that be? Would that be W.E. Emerson?
Yes, that's W.E. Emerson's.
Yeah.
This was the father first founded this business, so approximately the 1860 period.
Then he must have came from West St. John to St. John, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
Yeah. Because I can remember them on Germain Street and then over on King Street.
Right. Right. It was Charles Emerson who started the business, who was the founder, and passed on to his sons, and the business changed several times, the locations.
Now, yeah. And we have here now?
This is another slide of Union Street from the Waldorf Cafe looking down Union. And on the right-hand side of this picture, you see the fountain, Band of Mercy fountain, where the beasts and man alike would get their water. And of course, they were an important thing in those days. As you know, most things were horse-driven.
Horse-driven.
And
we had 3 or 4 of them in the city, and I think we only have one left, and only actually part of it. It's there. It's been renewed. And the others, they just don't know where they disappeared to.
Yeah. Well, this one here has been placed in front of the Carlton Community Center in Tilly Square.
And it's still there now?
And it's still there today, yeah.
Oh, I was
it was moved there. Well, it was in storage for a while, but a few of the citizens on the west side got together, and mainly Mr. and Mrs. Parks over there, and they pushed the city and the Harbors Board, and they had it put up in Tilly Square, which is a good thing for...
Very good.
Yeah.
You say, wait a minute, you said Tilly Square?
Tilly Square, I call it.
Where's Tilly Square?
Well, on the city maps, it's referred to as King Square.
King Square West?
South.
South.
But it's... to the West Siders is Tilly Square. Now, it's always been called Tilly Square by the West Siders. I never got into tracing back when it was changed or why it was changed or anything, but it's known as by all residents of Carlton as Tilly Square. And it's immediately in front of the Carlton Community Center, that square between King Street and Duke Street, at the foot of Duke.
Will you do some research on that for me and come back and tell the people?
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
Now, again, this is another picture of Union Street, and these pictures just show the different businesses and the different sections of Union. This is from Ingram's Corner, and interesting thing about the early days is almost every corner was referred to as by a citizen's name. Like on this particular corner, it was Ingram's Corner. Across the street from it was Dunlop's Corner. You know, the next corner was called Thompson's Corner.
All residents, I presume.
All must have been notable residents of the area, and people referred to the corners as by their name.
I never looked at it that way.
Again, this is another angle or view of Ingram's, and it shows the Lingley's Barber Shop and Goodwin's Meat, and it shows also, you can see the streetcar wires and the tracks where the local streetcars ran down to the ferry terminal.
You know, I used to drive the bus after they took the streetcars off. I used to drive from the ferry up around the Queen Square Loop. There was never too many people that rode on it.
Oh. Yeah. I was only on the streetcar once, Bobby, that I can remember. With my father when I was young. I went to town with him, but that was the only experience I had on a streetcar.
You know, it's interesting that we have today 2 men driving bus that drove streetcar here in the city.
Is that right?
Yeah, and I'd like to be able to get, if people are out there interested, I'd like to ask the 2 drivers to come on. I don't know if they will or not, but it would be very interesting, I think.
Sure would.
Yeah, one is Elmer Kierster, who's on the east to west, and the other is Audie Brown, who's on the Glen Falls. And I think it'd be most interesting to see the changes that they went through, because they went from the Power Commission, I think, that owned it at the time, and then they went into St. John Transit, or City Transit. Now it's the St. John Transit.
Right.
Let's get back to your west. Sorry.
Okay, again, this is Union Street, but this is looking the opposite way. This is looking towards St. John Street from the Winslow Street corner. Mm-hmm. And this building on the corner is the Ideal Store and S.L. Lane's Tobacco. And the next building, the big brick building, is the Bank of New Brunswick, which later became the Bank of Nova Scotia. Mm-hmm. Had that backwards the last time, didn't I, Bobby?
Yes.
So. This slide is the corner of King and Union, and this is the water side. The streets at that time, Bobby, all the streets on the west side, Prince Street, Duke Street, Winslow, Rodney, went right on down to the water.
Yes.
Today they stop at Marketplace.
All except St. John Street.
All except for St. John.
Yeah.
But before the expropriation, they were the same as St. John. They kept right on going down till they met Union Street.
Well, didn't they come down, was it Charlotte Street? And then they had an overpass, or was it Rodney Street?
Rodney Street. They had the old overhead bridge.
Yeah.
And I don't think they didn't tear that down till the 70s. It wasn't that long ago they tore it down, but that was, instead of the men having to walk a way around when they were getting off work or going to work, the longshoremen, they built that overhead bridge for a shortcut for them.
That's when the port was very, very busy.
Very, very busy.
And Fred, you know, time has run out again, and we're going to have you come back again. I hope you will. The West Siders have all called in to have you come on. Now, before we go, I'd like to mention that if you see a difference from the first half of the show to the second half of the show, we try to make arrangements for our guests to come in. And we might have one setting, and then when Ruby comes in, we'll have a different setting. But we have quite a few experts here, and they can really patch these things together. And I want to thank you very much for watching, and don't go away, because Ruby will be right in.
Share a little bit of yourself without even knowing. When you share a little bit of yourself, you'll find good feelings growing. Share something no one else can, yourself. From the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Mormons.
Welcome back. I'm here again with our yesteryear lady, Ruby Cusack. But I have a question for Ruby right off the bat, because we've had a few calls after one of our shows. She showed a picture of a young girl. Now, this must have been taken, what, 50, 60 years ago? Or?
Oh, more, Bobby. I would say probably in the 1890s. Probably.
1890s?
I would think so. Early 1900s at least, eh?
Some people are very interested in that particular picture. They said that they seen the shoes, how they buttoned the way up, and the heavy dress, and the ring, and so on. Who was the young girl?
Her name was Ada McIntyre. Her mother would have been a sister of my great-grandmother, and her mother was a Jones. She lived on the corner of Newman and Adelaide Street, and her father was Captain Duncan McIntyre, a sea captain.
You have a few things that belong to her, too.
Yes, I'm wearing one. Tonight I have quite a few of her things. I have her a locket of hers. I have her wax doll. I have a little wicker rocking chair that her father had brought to her. I have many things from her. When I came to St. John as a little child to stay, that's where I went to visit. Way up on the third story would go, and the house was old. It really hadn't changed a great deal. When I think of it now, if I'd only listened more to what they were telling me. She lived with her aunt, and her aunt was quite a bit older than she was. And they were both ladies that hadn't married. Ada Mac, as she was lovingly referred to by many, turned out to be a fat, jolly lady. She was very artistic. I have some of her artwork. She worked at designing hats, and then she worked for G.E. Barber Company. So that is who the little girl in the picture. We've answered the questions, I hope.
Yeah. Now, I thought that Ruby wrote about 4 books, but you wrote more than 6 books, haven't you?
Well, I've written 6, and one is a double, so we'll have to say 6.5, will we?
Yeah. Well, tell us a little bit about them, please, because they're all pertaining to St. John, aren't they?
Yes, they are all the St. John area. The first one I did, and this was one that was called Yesteryear, and it's the index to the death roll of the St. John Globe, 1897 to 1926. This book, a couple of people gave me great encouragement to do it and helped me greatly in doing it. For the St. John Globe had published every January about 500 names of residents and former residents from St. John.
That have died.
That died in that year. And Bobby, there's no rhyme or reason to the names they picked or how they picked them. I mean, one relative mightn't be in there, and another relative would be in there. My breakthrough was in finding my mother's name was Provan. And in one of these, we found a Dr. Provan who died in the States. But Mom had always said that my grandfather's middle name, Robert, was for his uncle who was a doctor. Yeah. Well, it doesn't really seem...
No, but it does tie in, doesn't it?
It did, yes, because when we found... See, what this will do, when you find... This is indexed by each year, and there are 16,000 names in the book, but our computer wouldn't take all the names. But let's just say you looked up, and I've opened to page 1903, and it says Mary Cogger, August the 20th of 1903, and she was 88 years old. So now, what you do there, then you would go to the newspaper. They're all in microfilm down at the library. And you would look up that date in the newspaper, find the issue of the paper. Then it might say, well, Mary Cogger was the daughter of, or her children were, and it opens up.
Gives you all that information.
There is a copy of that at the St. John Regional Library in the archives, or I guess you call it the Information Center. The Provincial Archives, I gave them a copy, and the Geological Society, I think, has one, and the Peter, I say where Peter Murphy, where Peter doesn't work anymore, at the archives office with where Paul and Mary are of the diocese. They have one also there.
Well, there's one of these books in the library.
Yes.
A copy of each one of these books.
Yes, the library has that. But this one, it became almost a passion with me. I worked night after night.
You must be quite a typist.
No, I didn't type. Had a friend who typed. I wrote it up longhand. But the microfilms were very poor. The papers were very poor print to copy. And what a lot of did, I took a magnifying glass and sat there and read through the manual and then copied. Then brought them home, and a friend of mine then typed them into her computer. But I loved doing it. It was wonderful. And I would never have finished it except Alan and Sandra and Muriel, I think, are the three people that kept encouraging me the most.
What's their first names? What's their last names?
Well, I won't give those because they want to stay in the background, they tell me.
What's your next book then?
The next book is the Maggie Vale.
No, we didn't do a show on the Maggie Vale yet, did we?
No, but we mentioned Maggie Vale.
Yes, when we were talking about the Johnson and the Ben Lomond.
That's right. And on I've done a slide of a man that is involved with Maggie Vale. In fact, he was the culprit in the case, and he was John Monroe. Now, John Monroe was a top architect for St. John. And the next slide I'm going to show you will show you one of the buildings that he designed, and it is the Wiggins Orphanage. And the Wiggins Orphanage in later years became the first St. John the Baptist School. But John Monroe, that really is another story, and I wanted to write the story more or less of Maggie Vale. Now the next one will show you the Maggie, when he took Maggie Vale out for the fatal drive, he took her out to the Ben Lomond Hotel. And this is a picture of the old Ben Lomond Hotel. And the reason that I wrote this story, Bobby, was as a little child, I used to have uncles come to visit or older people come to visit. We didn't have television in those days. We did have a radio, but you listened, and it always ended up with some real good mystery stories or ghost stories. And I had an uncle who lived here he lived at Colebrook, and his name was Uncle Ernie Floyd, and he would love to, could he tell stories? Oh, his stories, you'd be afraid to almost go to bed that night. He'd tell all great stories. But he was one that talked about this, and then my father-in-law talked about the Maggie Vale, because down on the road to Garnet Settlement, since 1868 or 1869, they claim there has been a white rag, even now it's a Sobeys bag, hanging on a tree where this terrible deed took place.
I've heard that. I've never seen it, but I have heard it.
One lady who's in her 80s told me that as a child, she was taken there, and she says, and I actually saw the rock where this deed took place. It was a tragic thing that happened. Maggie Vale was a girl who got involved with John Monroe, and there was a lot of reasons as to what actually happened. But anyway, John Monroe strangled his illegitimate daughter, and he shot her. But it's not the story so much of the tragic thing that happened, but it's what has kept it alive is this white rag on a tree. Of course, ghost stories have evolved from that. A horse is trotting down the road at night, and suddenly the horse shies, and they know they're near the Maggie Vale place. But really, it's the rag in the tree that has caused it, and these are the stories that have gone. So we'll leave Maggie Vale, and we'll go on to our next one, and the next slide will show you, and I will show you the book also. And this is the tragedy in Courtney Bay, and this was the young story of
We did a show on that Fred Young, and I had a lot of comments on it, but I've read that book. It's the only book of yours actually I've fully read, but it was excellent.
This one was written, I wrote it for the children.
Children in grade 5 in your class.
Grade 5 is who I wrote it for them. And the next slide will show you the young monument in King Square. The story is, it's really, I could say maybe, we think of all the heroes of St. John when we read this story. I also have made up for my kids a little activity book
I was going to mention that activity book. I think it's tremendous. It really is.
What it is for our viewers, we can tell them it's the book will look the same as mine, only it says my book and their name is on it. And then I've taken the pictures and put the words around the picture.
You just picked out the key words.
The key words, like if you had any one picture, and all the key words would be around it. And
blank lines underneath, so they would write their own story.
They wrote their own story of it. I did it with my class and 2 other classes at school. It went over bigger than what I ever thought it would go over. Many of the children went to King Square to visit the monument. Now that monument was designed by John Rogerson, and he did the Marco Polo figure. As we said before, the young man, Fred Young, has a cousin who's still living in St. John, and it's Mrs. Edith Davis, and she gave me a great deal of information about the story. And this again was for the children, and it's such a wonderful part of St. John's history that I want everybody to know it. So now I'll go on to, I think the next one, and the next slide will show her picture. No, the next slide isn't going to show her picture. The next slide is going to show her picture, but her picture is a kid. And it's,
who was the book of?
Well, the book is going to be about Lady Latour, but I'd like to tell you a bit about the introduction to it. And
Please do.
This one is shows a girl on a motorcycle, and the cat is driving the motorcycle. And this is the introduction to this Lady Latour book that I have done. And what it is, the child's name is Carolyn, who was in honor of my own daughter, and she has a cat, Zeke, a black cat, Zeke, which you have met.
Yes.
And this is the story. Carolyn in the book is always a problem. Now, in Lady Latour, it's Easter Sunday, and she's very bored. And mother gets annoyed and says, well, go find something to do. And she goes out and climbs up into the apple tree, into a playhouse. And Zeke is there sleeping in the sunshine. Now, Zeke has magic powers. This whole family of cats are very magic. He can take her back to yesteryear land. And the secret was a ruby ring that they found. And you'll like this. When she rubs the ruby ring and says the magic words, yesteryear lady, then they are able to go anywhere that they want to go in yesteryear land. And Zeke takes them in this purple magnetic-powered motorcycle. This is the story. Now, the first story I've written on this, and I'll show you the picture of the lady, and it is Lady Latour. What do you know about Lady Latour, Bobby?
Very little, because that part of the history I never really got into. I know about the Fort Latour and the battle that was there, but no, I do not have too much information on Lady Latour that I could talk. But I will read your book.
You read my book on Lady Latour. The Lady Latour, when I wrote this, I wrote it again with a controlled vocabulary. I wrote it for the children. I mean, the introduction to it, all these books I'm going to write are all introduced for a child in a grade 5 level to be able to read.
You just said with the vocabulary, controlled vocabulary. Now, these books here, I hear on the radio, I'm a little off right now, but I hear on the radio that they're looking for books for adults to read. And they're looking for children's books. But here you have adult books, history, with a controlled vocabulary. I think these books would be great for somebody learning to read.
Yes, it wants to be it's very difficult for an adult to read. Well, we read from the Dick and Jane. Well, they've improved a great deal since those. Yes. But it's to get a story, and this one would be, I'm sure
books would be good then.
A grade 4 child could read it. Even a grade 3 child probably could read it. But Lady Latour was such a wonderful lady. She was such a heroine of St. John. And there's a lady in St. John who dresses up as Lady Latour quite often. And it's Emma McCready. Many years ago, I taught with Emma McCready, and Emma has given me so much of the feel of Lady Latour, such a heroine of St. John. And I would love to see someday a nice statue built to Lady Latour. Now, the back of that book Lady Latour, is the story of the Marco Polo.
Which I know we're going to be getting a lot off, and I think it's tremendous. And I hope we get our Marco Polo village.
I'd like to mention, Barbara, I'm interrupting you, but this cover was done by a boy in my room, Mark Fenton. The children have got 3 or 4 of their pictures in the book, but Mark, who really certainly has talent, did the cover.
That is terrific. I want to thank you very much again, Ruby, for coming. And would you like to give the ladies and gentlemen out there your number again, your telephone number?
652-8887.
You must have a couple of phones in the house.
I have a teenager who uses it all the time.
Thank you very much for watching. Say good night.
Good night.
Good night, everyone. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Cable 6. I have with me again my guest, that Western gentleman, Fred Miller. Now, we've had a lot of requests now. Fred's been, what's this, 3-4 times now you've been back with your pictures? And Fred has an awful lot of history of West St. John. It seems that the West St. Johners, when they see something, they want to see more of it, they'll call. And I'd like to mention that Dick Irvin, who's a West St. Johner, who is in Toronto right at the present for his double lung transplant, called me at night, and he asked me on the show to say thank you and hello to all the West St. Johners. And so you've heard it now from me, and if you happen to write to Dick, let him know. Now, Fred, what do we have for the this evening?
Bobby, I thought this evening we'd talk a bit about Navy Island.
All right. Our last show we did Union Street, Navy Island, and part of Navy Island. Actually, Navy Island is just there, but it's covered with a leg of the bridge, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Navy Island was, as I said in the previous show, was just off Carlton Point, and Navy Island was when Champlain de Mont first sailed up the mouth of the St. John River, the first inhabitants they came upon, Bobby, was on Navy Island, an Indian tribe, and they had a fortified area on the island, and it was called the Owen-Gandhi.
Owen-Gandhi?
Yes, which later there was a ferry named after the island. And it was run by a chief by the name of Chacondan.
What type of Indians were these?
I think they were Micmac, Bobby.
Micmac, yeah.
And they visited with the Indians on the island, and as I said, they had a large marketplace in the middle of the island, which seemed to serve as a community building, and then there was other enclosures that they lived in. And it was all encircled on the outside of the island by a layer of trees bound together. And that's made this fortified area.
There was an Indian fort. Can you tell me how it got the name Navy Island?
Because it belonged to the Navy at one time, I would imagine, the British Navy.
It belonged to the British Navy?
Yes.
I see.
It was when, for a while, it wasn't really part of St. John. When the city incorporated in the area, the island was excluded because the British Navy wanted that for a strategic point, of entering the harbor for protection and that.
You mean it wasn't part of it wasn't part of St. John or Carleton?
It wasn't part originally, no. When the charter was drawn up for the city of St. John, Navy Island wasn't included because it was kept by the Royal Navy as a protective point for the harbors of St. John.
Oh, all right. Can we see a picture of it now?
Yeah. This is the best picture I could get of Navy Island, Bobby, and this picture was probably taken in the early 1900s, and there was approximately 10 homes on Navy Island.
Like this is after the Indians had left. There's been other people on there.
Yeah, after the Indians, when the whites started settling, the Indians moved on.
I see.
And the whites settled on the island, and actually this is probably the first area of St. John that was occupied.
So if anybody out there has a better picture of the island, you'd like to get a copy if possible. But Fred, say there's somebody out there that has a picture of West, they presume it's West St. John and don't know the picture. Would you identify it for them?
I would sure try, Bobby. I think I would probably be able to identify any picture for them.
I mean, when it comes to West St. John, if you can't identify it, it's not a West St. John picture.
I don't think so, no.
What's next then, Fred?
The next picture we have is a aerial photograph, and to your middle right-hand corner, this picture was taken about the time that they started the development of the waterfront, and it shows the cofferdam on the right-hand side, and this cofferdam was the construction means by building the new 1, 2, 3 piers for the Harbors Board, which was constructed by joining the point of Carleton out to Navy Island, and from the opposite tip of Navy Island around to Five Shed. They built a large breakwater barrier first, and then after that was built, they started draining the water out of the cofferdam. Now this area that they constructed covered 35 acres, was estimated at. And there was 100 million gallons of water in this area that was enclosed.
100 millions of gallons of water?
That's what was estimated.
And they had to disperse all that, to get all that water out of there? And
they had to get all that water out of there, Bobby, and they did it by means of, they had 8 pumps with a capacity of 23,000 gallons per minute. And they pumped for something like 3 days straight, day and night. But
that would have been quite a feat. I'd like to have seen pictures of that. I've heard a little more about that.
Yeah, well, that was the biggest cofferdam in the world. That was the largest cofferdam ever constructed. And it was 4,300 feet approximately of barrier.
You say cofferdam. Why
cofferdam? C-O-F-F-E-R.
Coffer. Oh, I see. And the meaning of that?
That structure was referred to as that. I don't know whether it was somebody who came up with the idea or whatever, but you know, there was others prior to the Navy Island development, and they were referred to as cofferdams.
Maybe we can get a little more information on that later.
Yeah.
Good.
But these pumps pumped till the water was completely out, and then they started the dredging, and then when they got down to the rock, of course, the blasting, and the piers from the top of the new concrete piers to the bottom was roughly probably about 68 feet. So they did a lot of digging.
They did a lot of digging.
Yeah, and
what do we have here?
This is another slide of the cofferdam. It's an aerial view, and it shows the size of the cofferdam and the area of the water. As you can see, it's a very large area of water that was enclosed. Now in this picture, there's a break at the end of the cofferdam towards Five Shed, and in the spring freshet, the tides and water got so strong that it broke, and they had to reconstruct and reinforce the cofferdam. So they lost a little time.
The amount of pressure there, you know, it's unbelievable that it could take that amount of pressure.
Yes, it is. It must have you know, the construction must have been quite an undertaking in those days.
I had a chap call me one day and he was telling me about the way the wharfs were at one time, how the water would come down one side and up the other.
Yeah.
But then when they built the wharfs, how it changed all the flow of water, you know. It almost comes down like an L shape now.
Yes.
And,
well, I think it had a lot of effect on the flow of the water, the tides, the currents, because they enclosed a large area that was, you know, the water was flowing freely before. And of course, when they joined out to the island, Navy Island, there was an area of water between the island and Carleton Point that was flowing freely. And I know in my day the tides around the tip of Navy Island were very, very strong.
were you ever on Navy Island?
Not before it was entombed by the Harbor Board facilities, but many a times as a youngster, that was a popular area to go down and play in Navy Island, and there was a lot of fool's gold down there, and there was. Yes. And in fact, in early days, there was a lot of stories that there was gold there, but
it was just the fool's gold.
It was just the fool's gold, and of course, it did fool quite a few people in the early times. But
what do we got next, Fred?
Well, this picture shows the mill pond, and the reason I'm showing that is because it shows the filling in of the mill pond. Now, as I said in an earlier show, this fill came from when they were digging 1, 2, 3 piers, and
oh, the fill came right from over there, right from, like you say, the piers, and they took it and dumped it in the mill pond.
Yes, right.
Oh.
And they did this by means of they had tracks in which they ran a little engine called a donkey car. It was a small little engine and it hauled cars in the back that were filled with this earth, and they would tip and let the earth out, and then they'd spread it over the mill pond. And this went on day and night.
You see these in movies where they have hauling coal out of the...
right, the same idea.
Same idea. And they did that day and night until such time they got it filled.
That's right. And that was, as I say, that was part of the Harbor's Board agreement to replace some of the lands that they were...
That'd be all around Dominion Court there, wouldn't it, near the market?
Yeah, where the ball field is.
Where the ball field is.
Yeah, all the wartime houses, Dominion Court, that area, right from Ludlow Street down to the Union Street where it exists today, and right up just immediately in the back of the center, and down as far as St. John Street. That's all fill.
Well, what do we have next then, Brad?
Our next picture, again, is another view, and in this view of the Coffer Dam, we're getting to the point that they're starting the construction of the piers. And it shows the lower end of King Street area and the old marine dock. As you know, Bobby, at one time the marine dock used to be over the west side.
St. John, yes.
And later moved over town.
Yeah.
And this is getting pretty close to the final stages of the construction of the piers. So as you can see also in the right-hand center of that picture, the grain elevator is fairly well along as far as the construction goes.
My time's running out again, Fred. You know, we're going to have you back because we haven't got near any of your... You must have thousands of pictures of West St. John.
Well, I got a couple hundred anyway, Bobby, but...
Okay then, Fred, we're going to have you back again, and I want to thank you very much for coming. And say hello to the West St. Johners when we meet over there.
I will.
I hear you take a lot of walks over that way, too.
Yes, I do, Bob.
Well, thank you very much. Now, stay tuned, because Ruby Cusack is going to come in, and she's going to tell us a little more about Hatfield's Point. Thank you very much now.
A riddle. What do 1 million Canadians have in common? What doubles your risk of heart attack? What can cause